My name is Sarah Stefanich, and I'm one of the World Language Sales Consultants with CLET World Languages. In particular, I specialize in our Spanish higher ed products and materials. Before starting working with CLET, I was a Spanish instructor for over 10 years, and I actually had the opportunity to teach with a predecessor of AULA en Acción. And it was very much just a wonderful experience for both me and my students. And so I'm very excited to be here with you all today to talk to you a little bit about AULA en Acción, the latest and greatest release in the AULA series. So let's get started. So today we are talking about AULA en Acción, a comprehensive task-based communicative Spanish program. And as I mentioned, this is one of the newer releases from CLET World Languages. And our mission here at CLET World Languages is to help students learn language that they can use in real life situations. One of the things that I think sets us apart at CLET is that we are a company filled with educators. I myself taught Spanish for over 10 years, and pretty much every person you see in those boxes on your screen has spent a significant amount of time in the language classroom, both as an instructor and as a student. And so this means that we very much believe in what it is that we do. We are language people. We believe in the power of educators, and we really want to work to support them both in and outside of the classroom. So that brings me to telling you a little bit about AULA en Acción. So let's learn about the basics. AULA en Acción is a very modern program. It's inclusive, it's innovative, and it's aimed at students learning Spanish at the introductory and intermediate levels. It follows a communicative approach to language learning, specifically a task-based approach, wherein students engage in these tasks that require them to use their Spanish in functional, authentic ways for real-world purposes. AULA en Acción is a student-centered program that offers authentic, engaging content that really awakens students' curiosity about the Spanish-speaking world. And it's also perfectly aligned with ACTFL's world readiness standards. AULA en Acción comes in a split volume, as you can see here, AULA en Acción 1 and AULA en Acción 2. AULA en Acción 1 is at that introductory level, so it's perfect for that first year of college or university Spanish. And then AULA en Acción 2 is at the intermediate level, so it continues and completes the series and is perfect for that second year of college or university Spanish. AULA en Acción itself is comprised of several different components. So first we have the student edition or the student textbook, and this is available in both print and digital format. Then we have our workbook, and this is available in digital format only on our online platform, which we call the Spanish Hub. So that's where you will find any digital resources, the digital student book and workbook. And then the last component that I'd like to give a special shout out to is the annotated instructors edition. Again, available both print and digitally. And this is really where you'll find a wealth of information. It's a great resource for teachers. You will have the answer keys, tips for lesson planning, kind of connections to those 5 C's from ACTFL, and much, much more. So let's go ahead and take a look at the scope and sequence. AULA en Acción 1 is comprised of 15 lessons or 15 chapters. Each chapter starts with the student learning outcomes and ends with the tarea final or the final task. In these final tasks, students engage in various activities that are inspired by real-world scenarios. For instance, in Chapter 1, they create a poster to introduce a classmate. And in Chapter 6, they give out awards to classmates based on characteristics of their daily routines. Students will also describe their ideal neighborhood, they will describe their ideal home, and create a menu for a class party. Rounding out the last 4 chapters, students create a movie plot, they talk about the most interesting time period in history, and they tell a personal story or anecdote. So as you can see, these final tasks and topics of each chapter or lesson are truly designed to get students using the Spanish language from day one. AULA en Acción 2 contains 12 chapters or lessons, and it picks up that thread that we left off in AULA en Acción 1. So here in AULA en Acción 2, students continue learning Spanish by using their Spanish in a variety of scenarios that they can take with them outside of the classroom. They'll write a cover letter for a job, they'll design and present an advertising campaign, they'll talk about the future, write an open letter proposing solutions to current world problems, and they'll create a poster that features new objects that we need in our daily lives. As we move towards the end of AULA en Acción 2, students will propose solutions for a better world. They'll create a class news program, and they'll write an email in response to a misunderstanding. In the last chapter, students write a personal reflection about the last 2 years, which I just really think is a great way to kind of end and wrap up what is this 2-year sequence of AULA en Acción and propel them to future learning scenarios. So now that we've gone over a kind of a brief overview of the AULA en Acción program, let's take a deeper dive into a chapter. Here we see the chapter opening. On the top, you can see the final task of the lesson, which is modeled after ACTFL's can-do statements. So here we are in AULA en Acción 2, Chapter 2, and we can see that it says, en esta lección vamos a escribir una carta de presentación para un trabajo. In this lesson, we are going to write a cover letter for a job. This opening page also details the learning outcomes. So what it is students will do in this unit, the grammar and vocab they will use to do so, and the knowledge they will learn. The chapter itself starts with a section called Primer Contacto, which is sort of an opening introductory activity that gets right into the theme of the chapter and helps to stimulate any background knowledge. From there, we move on to this next section called Comprendemos. And you might have guessed from its title, this section really emphasizes the interpretive mode of communication, both listening and reading. And this is where you're going to find all of the active vocabulary from the lesson presented in context. The goal is for students to process these new words and these new phrases for meaning, first and foremost. And then there's also some guided activities that help them begin to interact and use these new words in a meaningful way. After comprendemos, we have the section Exploramos la lengua. In this section, students actively observe the language through authentic texts and other materials in order to develop an understanding of the communicative function of different grammatical structures. Again, we're going to see importance being given to interpretive communication. The new grammar is always presented in context, and students will always first be tasked with interpreting those new structures for meaning. Our next section is that of comunicamos. And while each lesson and each activity within AULA en Acción is dedicated to communication, this section is really where you're going to find a lot of those interpersonal, so conversation type activities and presentational activities. Here, instead of students being given the input and asked to do something with it, like we saw in those 2 previous sections, students are going to be responsible for providing that input themselves to their partners and their classmates. These activities also serve as sort of micro tasks or mini tareas, where we can really see the content of the lesson come alive, and they serve to help prepare students for the final task at the end of the chapter. From there, we move into a section titled Conectamos Nuestras Culturas. This section is dedicated to bringing us closer to Spanish-speaking cultures from a multifaceted perspective that is free from generalizations and stereotypes. So what we see in this section is a presentation of a variety of authentic texts in different formats and different genres. And the topics of these texts are very closely related to the topic of the chapter, which is something that I really just love. This section is not a random culture section that has nothing to do with anything, but it really follows and continues the connecting thread of the chapter. It also provides more input to the students, more opportunities to see the grammar and vocab in context, and more opportunities for students to process the language for meaning. In every Conectamos Nuestras Culturas section, there will be a short authentic video from the Spanish-speaking world. So let's take a quick look at one of these videos. And it will be a clip from AULA en Acción 1, Lesson 2.
Pues la gente, el clima, la playa, bueno, y la Ciudad de México también me gusta mucho.
En México, pues la gente, su comida, pues las diferentes, el sincretismo cultural, ¿no? Que se ve aquí en unos pocos metros cuadrados.
La comida, las vistas, la gente.
La comida, puede ser.
El cañón en Chiapas, su video.
Muy bueno.
Claro.
Y las playas en Yucatán.
La gente, la cultura, la comida también.
Moving towards the end of the chapter, we have a section titled Pronunciamos. And this is a page dedicated to helping students communicate more effectively in Spanish through targeted pronunciation activities. Again, you'll find that the pronunciation tips on this page are related to the content of the lesson, and so the practice in this section has an immediate effect on their communication abilities needed to be successful, not only in their daily classroom activities, but also on the tarea final. The chapter ends with the final task, which is called Ahora podemos. As I mentioned, these final tasks are modeled after the can-do statements from ACTFL. They are based in real-world situations and scenarios, and they require students to use all their linguistic resources to achieve a communicative goal. In these final tasks, students will work individually or in groups and pairs. They will engage in some research, some brainstorming, collaboration. They'll be asked to think critically about the topic and be given time to revise and elaborate on their own work. The final product will often be in that presentational mode of communication, where students are going to be asked to create a written or spoken product. Something that you might have seen that is a bit different about AULA en Acción is that you'll find all those active vocab lists and grammar rules and explanations at the very end of each chapter in a section called Recursos Lingüísticos. And this is done on purpose. It is done to reinforce the idea that grammar and vocab are tools to help us communicate effectively. And so the chapter in the textbooks presents them as such in the section called Linguistic Resources. Each chapter also contains an IPA, or an Integrated Performance Assessment. Each IPA contains various activities dedicated to the comprehension of written and audiovisual materials, and they allow for the creation of students' own original texts. So these IPAs can be used as a summative assessment for the lesson, so think sort of a chapter exam, or they can be leveraged as additional activities in or outside of the class. We've walked through a sample chapter, so now I'd like to take a moment to tell you about some unique features. AULA en Acción contains these special types of text called textos locutados and textos mapeados. Basically, for every written text that you'll find in AULA en Acción, there will be a corresponding texto mapeado and texto locutado. The textos locutados are audio recordings of the text that are presented in 4 different varieties of Spanish. So you see Colombian Spanish, Spanish from Spain, from Mexico, and from Cuba. The textos mapeados are a PDF version of the written text with different words and phrases highlighted. In particular, we draw attention to connecting words, frequently combined words, and verbal phrases. And these 2 different texts serve to support the texts in the book itself and provide extra resources and activities and scaffolding for students. We have a ready-made assessment program that accompanies AULA en Acción. In addition to the final tasks and the IPAs that we've already talked about, that we have featured in the textbook, we have several assessments available on the online platform. For every chapter, there will be a downloadable exam, and then also an interactive quiz for students to do on the platform itself. And then we also provide rubrics for all of these assessments. I mentioned at the beginning that the Annotated Instructors Edition is a wonderful resource for teachers. Here we see a quick example of that, where we've got the student book in the middle and then all those annotations written around the edges, giving you the answer keys, tips for lesson planning, information on different modes of communication and goals for individual activities, connections to ACTFL's World Readiness Standards, and much, much more. AULA en Acción also contains a wealth of digital resources that are available on our online platform, the Spanish Hub. So what can you find on the Spanish Hub? Well, here you have kind of a brief, quick list to get you started. In addition to the things I've already mentioned, you will find grammar tutorials, grammar tables, pronunciation tutorials. You'll find all the videos and audios and also transcripts of all of that, those textos locutados and textos mapeados, sample course calendars, and more. So that brings me to the end of my presentation here about AULA en Acción. Thank you very much for your time and for listening. And if you liked what you heard and you would like more information or you'd like a sample copy, please feel free to write to me directly at the information in the email that you see on the screen. Thank you very much.